Welcome to part 2 of chapter 6, Critical Methodology. Okay, so the next concept we're going to talk about is that of ideographs. And these are something that still get talked about a lot. That term was first coined by McGee, who talked about the idea that these are supposedly an ordinary term, right? Just a useful language term that's used in political discourse in a way that actually allows a lot of abstract representation, right? It involves collective commitment. It lets people come around. It's equivocal, meaning there's multiple ideas that it could represent, right? Different definitions, and not very clear what the goal is, right? So these are terms, words or short phrases that have embedded within them the ideology. That's why it's called an ideograph, right? The ideology of a group or a nation or a culture. So some very common ones are liberty, right? Or equality or justice or belonging. These all mean different things to different people, and they're broad enough to be like, yeah, we're all for equality. We can get together. We're all for liberty, right? We believe in these things. They could go together. So looking at some ideographs, hashtag Me Too has become one, right? If I say that, all of you know what I'm referring to, right? The online activism surrounding movement started by a woman of color about everyday sexual harassment and sexual assault that women endure. Black Lives Matter has become an ideograph. It doesn't mean the same thing to all people, right? But it is something that people organize around. We Are All Dreamers. That's about the Dreamer Act, which is the DACA or Deferred Action on Childhood Arrivals Act for children who are brought here as undocumented immigrants as children, right? And allowing them a path to citizenship. And then finally, that gay rights are human rights, right? The rainbow and pride movements. These are very much ideas that let people organize and think and feel about issues while having real disagreements as well at the same time. They're powerful phrases. Okay, hegemony and polysemy are two other critical terms that are used a lot in critical analyses. Hegemony is a very dominant discourse. It's largely taken for granted. It's just assumed, for example, that democracy is good. And or that liberty is good, or that sort of pull yourself up by your own bootstraps is a very American idea, right? There's hegemonic ideas about what counts as femininity, right? What counts as masculinity. We might be getting more flexible about allowing women to do some masculine things and men to do some feminine things, but we haven't really gotten flexible at all about what constitutes a feminine thing, what constitutes a masculine thing. That has changed a lot less. And so this kind of understanding our dominant cultural idea, right, about who the deserving poor people are and who the maybe undeserving people are, um, these ideas affect us not by overt violence, not because somebody comes and beats us up if we disagree, although that has been changing lately, but more subtly, right? It's something that's taken for granted, something that's not questioned, something that we just think is the way it is, right? It's the status quo. And these kinds of beliefs tend to be very resistant to change, right? So the idea that the president has to be man in the United States has been unchanged, right? Two women have had the Democratic ticket, top of the billing, have run for president. One other, way back when I was an emerging adult, Geraldine Ferraro ran as Walter Mondale's candidate way back in the late 80s as the first female vice presidential candidate, but we've never elected a woman, and we have only elected one person of color in the entire history of the United States. So the idea of what makes a president as a white man is definitely hegemonic. Okay, polysemy is a very different approach, and it's about the idea of having multiple stories and perspectives, and meaning that a single text is not determined by its author. Once it's put out there, it's co-created by the author and the audience, and that there's legit many ways in which to interpret a particular text, not just one hegemonic reading, right, but a lot of perhaps more subversive or more challenging readings. So, for example, I did a study with my friend Patty Soderin, who's also a professor, and we looked at the popular cultural representations of aunts and nieces and nephews. She calls them aunts because she's from Milwaukee. I'm from New England, so I call them aunts, but whatever, about the way in which they've been represented in the media, how Aunt Jemima as a very racist trope, or the idea of there was a show called Sabrina the Teenage Witch that was very popular in the 90s and early aughts, and she lived with her two aunties, right? She didn't live with her parents. There have been other popular figures like Harry Potter lived with his mean Aunt Petunia, and James and the Giant Peach. James lived with two mean aunts, right? So there's a lot of circulating ideas about what aunts are. And we argue that they're not all regressive, traditional stereotypes of women and stereotypes of people of color and stereotypes of straight women in particular and of marriage. Some of them have really subversive challenges to the institution of marriage, to the institution of what constitutes a family, right? To institutions of allowing civil rights movements and particular artists to push back against white norms, right, and white power in society. And so that happens when we have multiple approaches to the same text. Another thing that's hegemonic is white beauty ideals, even in people of color. Unfortunately, worldwide, whiteness has become and sort of stereotypically white features for femininity and white beauty is no longer even most white women could never attain it. It involves, and here it has the list of expenses for things like Botox and lip filler and cheek implants and chin implants and all kinds of skin treatments and skincare products, right? And of particularly beautiful features, a nose job, right? Surgery for that, an eye lift, all the kinds of things in which you have to do to make the supposed norm, which is actually something that nobody can actually reach. So along this idea of polysemy, right, with multiple stories of pushing back, of reading against the grain, right, is also the school of postmodernism, or the critical approach of postmodernism, which pushes back and says, what constitutes a family? Let's question that, right? Maybe there's lots of valid family forms. What does it mean to be in community with others? Let's push back. Let's think about how that might happen. It points out that there's always multiple interpretations of a text, even if we all seem to be getting the joke. We might be getting the joke on very different levels. It also says, listen, because traditionally people thought, well, the person who gave the speech, they get to determine the meaning, right? Or the person who wrote the book get to say, no, that's not what it means. This is what it means. Or the person who produced the movie or the show gets to say, nope, this is what it means. It's not that, it's this. And postmodernism says, no, there is no one objective truth or one global narrative of reality. Instead, the audience gets to co-create the meaning, and it's always multiple, it's always intersubjective, and yet there are also other things that get to redetermine the meaning. So one example, for example, is a senator from New Hampshire, Elizabeth Warren, was trying to read a speech on the floor of the Senate. She kept getting shushed by Mitch McConnell, who was then the head of the majority leader in the Senate, and he kept telling her to quiet. And eventually, he did not recognize her, meaning she was not allowed to speak anymore. He made her leave. She went out in the hallway and did and recorded the rest of the speech that she had wanted to give, which was reading a very powerful letter from Coretta Scott King into the congressional record. She went and then she put it on her social media. And what Mitch McConnell said was, "Listen, Elizabeth Warren was warned." She was given an explanation. Nevertheless, she persisted. And the idea of warning a woman, of telling her to stop, and then and having that explained, and then she persisted, has been reappropriated. We've said, no, Mitch McConnell, that doesn't mean what you think it means, and it's been adopted as a slogan of women's empowerment, right? That nevertheless she persisted, despite having been warned, but despite having given this bogus explanation of why she can't have her point of view in there. This is not just a liberal thing. It is also done by conservatives, right, who also will take sayings and ideas from much more liberal or even moderate people like Joe Biden, right, and make fun of him and reinforce ideas, for example, about his love of trains. Many conservative commentators made fun of that, calling him, making choo-choo noises and talking about how much he loves to ride on trains. And that goes many ways. It's not just political speech. It's done with everything. Examples of critical perspectives include feminist, critical race, decolonizing, or some forms of that are also called postcolonial. CRIP, which is the radical form of disability studies or disability theory, queer theory, and these and many other intersectional perspectives intersect or overlap, meaning that you can have a critical feminist and race perspective, or you can have queer disability perspective. These things come together, and they're often what is used um, to do this kind of scholarship as the basis or the guiding framework for a critical analysis.